or is the film Lone Wolves and Dragon Tattoos, and what I asked you to do was write down what you thought were the most important points that help define Scandinavian crime fiction. So let's hear what people came up with for that. Thoughts? Yeah. Can you say your names today, too? Still, I'm trying to put names with faces. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Cassie, and I think it's a lot about the police procedural.
Okay.
More so than other types of crime.
Okay, so police procedural. That was a point we also hit on the first day, and as you saw, it gets echoed pretty loudly here. If people have seen or encountered Scandinavian crime fiction on television through, for example, public television's adaptations of the Wallander series, that's all police procedurals, right? Kurt Wallander is running around southern Sweden, panicked about this investigation or that investigation, and he's working with his police team. Police procedural. So, yeah, a subgenre gets defined as Scandinavian crime fiction. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Kaya, we talked about how one point in the movie was that how the books like really become a franchise.
Okay. Books become franchises. Thoughts about that very quickly? What does that mean? Yeah.
We were just saying how they talked about having the tour with the town.
Uh-huh.
And that all these TV shows make the books become more immersive into the culture.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great point, a very interesting one, that there's sort of tertiary activities for the books. That is a touristic side where if you want to, you read one of these novels, say you really like The Dragon Tattoo, you can go to Stockholm and take the Dragon Tattoo tour of Stockholm and see all the places and so forth where they drink the coffee or they live and so forth. So there's that whole side of it, and then there's also the movie spin-offs, the other entertainment products that come from the books. So the books, in a way, become the source for a lot of other entertainment, whether that's tourism or whether that's television or movies or other things. Yeah. So this is the commercial side of it, right? Yeah.
Jake, and the characters in themselves actually get franchised a little bit too. They were talking about how in these series of books, the writers would write the first one not knowing that this character would become the main character, like, you know, character kind of like everybody idolized in the series.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to make these odd transitions between him just being kind of having this backstory and being someone who's a part of everything to being kind of like the lead in every single book following that.
Okay, so that the characters then become very, very important. Here, just an example of a character that may not have seemed so important the first time through, but then as the series develops, maybe because of fan discussions or those kinds of things, the character becomes much more important and needs to take on a bigger role in subsequent novels. There's a couple things you can think about that. Number one, in crime fiction, character is usually pretty important, right? Especially that main character or investigator. Number two, the fans matter in a sense, right? If there's a very strong sense of investment by readers in these novels, in part because they're series. That's a third point. They develop over novels. Lena Lehtalainen, who wrote Copperheart, this is the third novel in that series. I think it's at 17 now that she's written about this character, Maria Kallio. So it's, you know, and it's the story of her life, really, that it becomes. You see right away in this novel we can talk about, there's all this kind of autobiographical reflection going on. That's an important part of the way she tells the story. And you can imagine if you like string that out a really long way from age 26 or 29 or however old she is to age 50, right? You can get 17 novels out of it. And she, you know, there's a lot of ups and downs in her life that get told in the story. So the character is very important. That's about the genre. It's also a series fiction. There's something about the characters that we find interesting as readers. And then that's the third point, right? The readers, the fans, are an important part of the genre. You can think about all those things as we go along here. Yeah?
Yeah, and I was going to say that another point is that they're usually in series, but that each individual book or movie has a
Okay, so they. So you're talking about with respect to Scandinavian crime fiction, there are also discrete series that are different one from the next.
Yeah, but like within those series too, like you read the Copper Heart.
Right.
You read books before or after that.
Right. Okay, so standalone novels and series. Yeah, they have to work by themselves as well, where they may sort of build upon one another, but without working as standalone novels. Obviously, can't work. A standalone novel can work, but it has to sort of do two things, right? Work in this as a part of the series and as a novel. The other thing we could say when you mention this standalone novels and series is that the series are, in a way, they're sort of brands, right? What do we mean by a brand? Anyone study? People I know there's people from the business school here, or business majors. What's a brand? I got my brands. Come on, what is it? Image, right? It's an image, association, a label, a name, right? It's a name with associations. That it's not just an innocent name, right? But very carefully created and marketed to create a set of associations: luxury, economy, taste. All these kinds of things that we associate with brands that are very important to the way. Of course, we live in a brand society in many ways where you define yourself in some ways by the brands you choose, right? I have an iPhone or I have a Samsung phone. What's the difference? Those brands, there's been millions, billions spent on trying to delineate what the one means and what the other means. Or Apple, to take one step out from the iPhone. What does Apple mean? It's not an innocent question because so much money has been put into trying to shape a certain notion and set of associations to go with you. In the same way, these books, this is one of the things that film really hammers home. These people recognized in Scandinavian crime fiction a valuable entertainment property and have tried to create sets of associations with it sort of as a brand. Right? Scandinavian crime fiction, now they call it Nordic noir, which is really the British term for it. But that's one of so it doesn't get called that quite as much in the United States. But if you read anything from the UK or comments about it, it's written for an international audience. Nordic noir is the term. And then what are the associations? One of the things that comes up in the film, these sorts of dour, introverted, troubled police investigators. That's one of the associations. Yeah, Gabrielle.
More of a question. Would you say that the branding got bigger once Scandinavian crime fiction was introduced to the U.S. versus just like when it was in?
The branding got big when Stieg Larsson made a lot of money, is what happened. That's the simple answer. Is that it was out there. For example, Henning Mankell began writing his Kurt Wallander series, I think in 1991 was the first novel. And those novels sold millions of copies and were very popular. But we're not going to read one in the class, but if you have the inspiration, you can certainly read one. They're very good. And Mankell they're kind of depressive novels. The characters not doing very well, but they were very well received, and they began to be made in a television series by Swedish Television. They played, for example, in the United States on PBS. So they got quite a following. But it was Larsson that had this, Lisbeth Salander, who we'll read about if you don't already know about her, who was this completely different character than had been a part of things, and that then generated this sort of big commercial interest. And then around that, they retrospectively said, what do we have here? Let's create this brand. And so then there's a kind of a history there, but it's the success of Stieg Larsson that changed things. Yeah. Point back there.
Austin, the authors seem to be more careful though about using the brand. They definitely create a brand, but they don't. One of them was talking about how they don't completely sell out and make T-shirts and mugs and just keep writing and pumping things out just because people will buy them. They seem to say that they'll stop writing and they run out of places.
Yeah. So Austin points out that you can get overexposed, and these authors are saying, I want to be very careful about that. What kind of point do you think that is? When people say, I don't want to be overexposed, or I don't want to go too far? Self-protection. In a way, it's a quality control argument. You know, when you try to get too big, what happens? You can't keep the quality at the same level, and as a result, people, the readers in this case, they feel like it's not what I wanted because I wanted the quality. And so the thing that they have to offer on that view is the quality, and when the quality suffers, then they don't have anything left. And so part of the self-protection is a recognition that there's a kind of a literary ambition here, and if you really just go for the total pulp, just churn it out and make as much money thinking of it as a complete commercial thing, then you end up with nothing. Any final thoughts here about this before we turn directions? Thoughts about how the film defines Scandinavian crime fiction? I think one of the important takeaways is that this Scandinavian crime fiction has become a well-known sort of global entity, right? People know about it, and there's associations that go with it. And this just tries to pull together one set of reflections and present them to you. So we'll leave it there for that one, and I'm glad that we got a chance to begin with that to get a sense of how Scandinavian crime fiction looks. Okay, the second thing we wanted to do was take a look at these keywords for today that I put up, which were genre, plot, and Finland. Let's just start with Finland here, since this is where our novel is set, and it's something I know a little bit about, and I can sort of lecture on about it, which I don't want to do. I just want to start by asking you, again, let's just do it in small groups, one thing that you know about Finland, or that you think when you hear the word Finland. Let's take 30 seconds to do it. Write one thing down, okay? And then I'll come around the room.
Sauna, you gotta pronounce it correctly. Sauna.
A+.
Well, English was so about that. You gotta pronounce it correctly.
A+. Okay, stop! Perfect. Okay, we don't need to, if this is just like that quick thinking. What's your gut thing? What does it tell you? Let's just start over here and kind of go around. What do you guys got?
Cold and good education.
Cold, good education. Okay, moving back. Just shout it out.
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus, okay. Moving back. Now just volunteer. Alcohol? Okay. We see a little bit of that in the novel here, right? So you can draw in the novel. Yeah, moving back here. What's that? Midnight Sun, very good. The northern climes. That goes for all the countries except for Denmark. What's that? Herring, okay. As in pickled herring. Very good. Further. What do you guys got in the back? Sauna. Okay, moving around over here, back there. Back. Flag? Yellow and blue, no. White and blue, right? White and blue flag. Further up. Forests, okay. Up here, in the middle. Okay, different language. From Scan, and actually from all of Europe except for Hungary and Estonia. I'll just comment briefly on that in talking about the keyword. Further up. Helsinki, the capital. Very good. Okay. You guys are going to have it hard up here. Coming up to the front further.
You said cold.
Cold. Okay, that's fine. We can repeat. Cold, cold, cold. Yeah.
Woods.
Woods. Good. You guys?
Venomous snakes.
Venomous snakes. That's true. They do have one. Environmental friendly environment we'll put. Very good. And last,
Immigration issues.
immigration issues. Okay, very good. Okay, so, and actually that's in the novel. A lot of these things are in both true of the country as a whole and present in the novel. So let me just touch on a few things here, and then hear comments as we go along that will fill out the keyword. my aim with the keywords is, number one, like for a keyword like Finland, maybe you don't know anything about Finland, but you're reading the novel, and I think it makes the novel richer, and you're able to get a lot more out of it, and you don't waste your time when you have a kind of a back picture against which you can situate the novel. So that's one of the points of the keywords. The second point is that these are terms that you can come away from the course with, having learned something that's going to aid you in reading Scandinavian material, European material, global material, say, for example, discussions about education, so that these are like keywords that are good for both literature and being an educated citizen on the whole. So that's the kind of the point here. Let's start with a fun one, alcohol, and we'll link it to Santa Claus and good education. Right, they all go together. And the cold, too. You can just lump them all together. So let's just, based on the novel, what kind of drinking goes on in the novel? A lot. Who's gonna offer us a little mini argument about what kind of drinking? Is anyone a sociologist or someone who knows about drinking from not just I did it, or I do it, but I know about it perspective? Yeah.
Like a lot of characters like Jasper, they drink to cope with problems a lot, which means a common thing. They seem to do it every time.
Okay, so yeah, there's some self-medication, right, where some of the characters seem to be drinking to control or to deal with personality or social problems they have. Problem drinking in general, right? So yeah, that's something. Would we call that alcoholism? I guess it depends on how long you've been doing it, maybe, right? It's one thing to maybe do it a little bit and then move on to other things, but if you're doing that all your life, then you're probably an alcoholic, right? One thing that's interesting, I think, about Finland is that I've lived there a lot. They don't really have the notion of alcoholism that we have. For example, if you're an alcoholic, you're like a street alcoholic, right? You've lost everything, and you're like a drunk, right, on the street. Versus, I think we can think of the functioning alcoholic. Maybe you have someone in your family or a close acquaintance or someone who has a drinking problem, struggled with it, and so forth, and been in and out of treatment and that kind of thing. We're familiar with that concept. There, it's a little less so. I remember reading an editorial in the Helsinki paper a couple years ago when I was living there about burnout. It's a concept that we have maybe a little bit less so in the United States, but they're not unusual for people to get a doctor's note saying that this person is in a situation of burnout, and they get like 2 months off from work, to kind of recover and recuperate and get back to it. And this person in this editorial was ongoing discussion was making a critique of burnout and said the problem with burnout is that people are tired from work and they come home exactly like, what was your name again? Pete pointed out, Uryaska, right? He's dealing with these problems by drinking, and then the problems feel more manageable when you're, drunk, and then the next morning you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get through the day? And the problems feel worse, and so you drink more to try to deal with it again, and pretty soon it's a vicious cycle. And this person was saying that's what burnout is. It's actually alcoholism. But because they don't really think about alcoholism in the same way, they have different terms. So the point is that some of the things we think of as alcoholic maybe are not identified as problem drinking there. And I would just say it's one way of thinking about European drinking cultures, to put Finland on that map, is there's sort of the vodka belt, which is Russia and Scandinavia, and then there's the beer and wine belt, which is Southern Europe or Central Europe, right? So in Germany they drink beer. France, Italy, Spain, they drink wine. Greece, they drink wine, right? And Finland, they drink, it's like a beer and vodka thing. But the thing is that it's it seems to be like a binge culture where it's okay to go drink a lot on the weekend, but then people don't drink anything during the week, but when they do drink, they drink a lot. And it's kind of funny. In one way, the vodka belt idea, it's like a geographical concept. It's up there somewhere in the north, and then people make points about the cold, dark winters and these summers where there, as was pointed out, there's a midnight sun, right? When you feel really manic and you want to go out and have a good time because you know it's going to suck in the wintertime. And so you got to get all that energy and take advantage of things in the summertime, stay up all night. So there's the geographic argument, but another one is that actually they've had very, very restrictive tax policies and tried to control alcohol for a long time. 200 years prohibition. Even still, there's a state alcohol monopoly in Finland. It's very interesting to think about because they have very, very sort of strong public health care. So alcoholism as a chronic disease is one of the main problems that creates high medical costs for a lot of people. So what do? They try to use the public sector and taxation to control people's drinking. So there's all this stigmatization and high prices and so forth. So what do the people do? They save up, and then when it's time to use it up, they really use it up, all right? They really get into it. So you can see, like, if you go out in a big city there, or there's certain places where there's, like, big drinking culture, people are, like, they're waiting for it, and then they just, like, let loose. So that's part that you could say there, that's related to tax policy and ideas about the public sector and public health that helps, build up bigger this kind of drinking culture. So that's a little bit about alcohol that we see here. The other thing to think about, we can talk about in the novel, is there's a character, Maria Kallio, is not just the culture, but that's part of that feminist hard-boiled. Remember, we touched on that on the first day. And if you remember the hard-boiled, it's like Raymond Chandler and Los Angeles in the 1940s and these hard-living private investigators. And they drink a lot, right? They never get drunk, but they're always drinking, right? Frank Sinatra style, right? Putting it down, just casually and stylishly. That's what the private eye and the hard-boiled does. So Maria Kallio, when she's drinking whiskey, that's kind of where it comes from, as much as from the culture, but from the literary style, allusions to that hard-boiled tradition. If you've ever read a novel by Sarah Paretsky, whose hero is V.I. Warshawski, this kind of well-known feminist and private investigator in Chicago, she drinks whiskey all the time. And so it's a kind of a allusion to a literary tradition as much as the culture. But the alcohol. So then good education. Who's heard of the Finnish education system? Lots of people. I was amazed, just as a personal reflection, when the guy who's like the guru of the Finnish education system, that is, the person who's kind of popularized the idea of the Finnish model, Pasi Sahlberg is his name. He came to campus last fall, and I was the lecture organizer. And I've organized a lot of lectures on this campus on Finnish topics. You know how many people come to them? Like 2. All right? So I'm like, this guy's a big shot. He's actually, his day job is as the director of Finnish language education internationally. So his office gives money to the UW so we can have a Finnish language lecturer here on campus, which is a great thing. So I want to make sure, fill the hall, right? So I was very nervous about that, and I really tried to get the word out. And the day before he spoke, he had an education event with local teachers and so forth. And all of a sudden, and then the PI covered it, and that was right after the charter schools debate here for the running up to the election and so forth. And we had the lecture over in Kane Hall. They wouldn't even give me a big room over there. They gave me like the 250-person room, which I thought, I'll be happy to fill it. And we had to lock the doors. People were trying to get in. They were standing in the back. There was like 350 people in a 250 room, and it was like, and why? Why? I've asked myself that. What is it? People are worried about education in Seattle, but also this Finnish model is sort of something different than like teachers need to be accountable. We need more testing. Failing schools need to have their funding cut. Those kinds of things. And it's a kind of a rational model. His main argument is, and you see this in this novel as well, is the main problem for education systems is when you have huge inequities in a society, and the poor kids are going to do poor, and the rich kids are going to do fine, right? If you have a lot of advantages, you're going to do fine. And so in Finland, what they've tried to do is minimize the differences and then build the education system on that basis. And so his whole point is give the kids more time, less time in class, let them be humans and enjoy learning, and they'll do very well in school. And they've sort of systematized that idea. So it's this very rationalist way of thinking about things. Solve the fundamental problems, and the rest will follow. Now sounds easy, right? Not so easy to do. But this is the good education, and that tells us a little bit about the state. Third point I want to make that's relevant to this novel, since it's a novel about corruption in some ways. The other side of that picture, that rationalist picture, what do you think it might be? What would you say if you were trying to criticize that education model? Take 20 seconds and just talk with someone sitting next to you. How would you criticize that idea of solve the fundamental level problems and build upon them? Just think about how you would criticize that. Take 20, 30 seconds to discuss between yourselves.
My biggest thing is not gifted children. It's like people who excel their stuff. They're other gifts. That's my thing. That's the only thing I'm because like anyone who's behind though, that's like great. I don't know if they yeah, it's like the only way I can it does restricts it restricts like
Okay, stop. Let's just hear a couple things that people came up with about what might be some criticisms of that way of thinking. Yeah.
James, I would have to say the only thing I could think of is if you're gifted or like if you're really smart, you can't get ahead. You're kind of like stuck with the rest.
Okay, so it levels everyone out, right? There's no opportunities for difference. Everyone's got to be the same. So it's too normative, right? And ask yourself, do you see that in the novel where it's like constricting, claustrophobic, I can't get out? Yeah, in the back.
Oh, I'm Hannah. They talked about how the minors' children didn't get as good of an education because they were kind of just testing to do what their parents did.
Okay, so the minors' children didn't get as good an education. And, right, one of the things we're saying is that there is an old class society here, and this maybe relates to the bigger point. If someone comes along to say, well, let's solve the problem this way, and that person comes from the ruling classes, really, are these minors' kids going to have any say in things? No. So it can be a very authoritarian system. And these 2 points we'll leave it at that. That number one, it can be way too normative, really claustrophobic. Number two, it can be the ruling ideas are the ideas of the people who are in control, right? And that can also make people feel left out, and it can also sort of give certain people way too much control, right, where they feel like they can do anything they want, right? When you have total control, you feel like you can do whatever you want, right? We see in American headlines too, right? Chris Christie, he's got all these problems because he closed the bridge. Why? Why did he close the bridge? It wasn't maybe him, but someone who knew what he wanted, right? Why did they do that? Because they won the election by 20 points. They think no one can do anything to them, right? We're going to settle scores because we're not responsible to anyone because we are going somewhere, right? This is the problem there too, where you have a system that is it's small and there's certain people who've been in power for a long time. They're the ones in control. So to finish about Finland, I just want to kind of give you a little historical point here. 1945, Finland had 3 wars with the Soviet Union, basically, between 1939 and 1945. Or the last one was a little bit different, but in any event, the wars ended. There was an occupation of part of southern Finland as part of its war reparations of the Soviet Union. And Finland had, in fighting these wars, had kind of fought off the big giant to the east, but the country decided, its leadership decided, we need to have a pragmatic relationship to the Soviet Union, otherwise we're going to get rolled again, right? Or not rolled, but attacked again and maybe rolled. And so they took this pragmatic policy and really gave a lot of leeway to the leaders who managed that policy. That reflects in this novel because it happens that the people who are in control of this town are people who are part of that system where there was really no challenge to authority for a long time. Why? We have to support the people in control of the society, our elected officials, because it was a democracy because they have a good relationship to the Soviet Union. And if we don't support them, our relationship to the Soviet Union could be endangered, and then there might be an invasion. So it's almost like the terrorism card in the United States, where maybe 5 years ago under George Bush II, right? That, oh my gosh, we got to listen to Bush because the terrorists could get us, right? So there's all this kind of politics that go with it, where whatever you think about that the threat becomes a license for doing all kinds of things one way or the other. That's the same thing that happened in Finland. Because the Soviet Union is a threat, we have to let the people in charge do what they need to do to maintain the relationship. We see that in this novel because the local officials here, they're all people who have come from this system and have a great regard for sort of the people in control, and everyone else is supposed to kind of ignore their faults and not criticize too much. So, in a way, it's the same point that James made about schools. It gets this kind of leveling thing where everyone's got to kind of line up and be the same and accept the system as it is. So this is one of the problems that is a part of Finland. So what do they do in response? Go get drunk on the weekend. But yeah, and eat a lot of herring and then sit in the sauna and so forth. There's a very funny song in Finnish popular culture called 5 in the sauna, 6 in jail, where that tells you a little bit about the culture, where how do you get into the sauna on a Friday afternoon after work at 5 and end up in jail at 6? You know, it's like a fast hour. But yeah, so that tells you, but that kind of like binge culture is part of things. Lots of forests, lots of resources there. Forestry and paper products have been very important. Now, Nokia was the big one too, and now of course no one said Nokia, but been sold to Microsoft, so we don't know quite what's going to happen there. And there are venomous snakes called Kyy. About the language, it's a Finno-Ugric language, very different language family from Indo-European languages, so it's not related to Latin or Greek, and it only Hungarian and Estonian in Europe are related to it. So that gives us Finland. We were going to talk also about genre and plot, but I think that what we will do is tackle genre first, take a break, then we'll talk about plot, then we'll talk about the novel, without getting too carried away. And to talk about genre just means a kind. So when people talk about genres of literature or culture, they're talking about kinds of literature. So for this course, the kind of literature we're dealing with is crime fiction. So how do you identify that kind of literature? We talked a little bit about that on the first day. There's an investigation. There's an investigator. There's clues. It all gets wrapped up in an explanation of the crime that was investigated. Those are parts of the narrative that we're always going to find in a crime novel. They have to be there. So what happens if it never gives you a solution, right? It's very frustrating. Some authors will do that sometimes. Or there can be violations of the implicit contract. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, very famous novel by Agatha Christie. The narrator is the murderer. So that's a real, it disrupts the expectations associated with the genre. But what we talked about on last Thursday are helpful here. I'm sorry, last Tuesday, because we can think of what are the parts that need to be there, and then analyze those parts. That's what I want to emphasize. So we have to have an investigator. What's the investigator like? What's the tradition of the investigator that is relevant? So, for example, within the genre of crime fiction, we can say there are different subgenres, sort of subparts of the greater form. The whodunit, the police procedural, the hard-boiled. All right. So what kind of parts are in each one? A whodunit, there's usually this private sleuth or inexperienced sleuth, and then a circumscribed cast of suspects. And then the sleuth interviews them and kind of uses his or her the subtleties of their psychological understanding to solve the crime. We have a little bit of a whodunit here, right? Or the police procedural, where we have the police team working together. We also have elements of the police procedural. So this is kind of a mixture. But that's a point about how the parts of the kind of literature, crime fiction in general, can give us some ideas about how to read a particular novel. So the important point about genre is that with a system of identification or classification comes an inventory list, things we can look for. The investigator, the cast of suspects, the setting, etc. And that we can use that list to both put the novel in context and to see what this particular author has done with those parts. Okay. So, any points about genre or questions about genre that are useful, or not? You think you'd like to ask? Nothing comes to mind. Okay, let's take a break here. It's 1/4 past. We'll start at 25 past, and then we'll talk about plot, and then turn to Copperheart.